to look at the boundaries between public policy and publicly funded religious educational institutions. We're going to look at two stories. Coming up later, we're going to talk about St. Paul's University, which recently told its Students Association to stop giving out condoms from its offices. But first, we'll look at the issue of the anti-bullying legislation that's making its way through the Ontario legislature. It includes a provision that schools must adopt gay-straight alliances if the students decide to form one. Some people in the Catholic educational system have spoken out against that. We're going to dig into this issue in more depth tonight, and joining us for the discussion are four panelists, starting with John Peter Mitchell, who is a senior research, it's Peter John Mitchell. Yeah. Yes, Peter John Mitchell, who's a senior researcher with the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada. Ruth Sirman, who is a mediator and a specialist in conflict resolution with Can Mediate International. Don Hutchinson, who's with the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. And Jeremy Dias, who is the founder of Jer's Vision. Welcome to all of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Marks.
And who wants to go first here? Jeremy, you've been involved in this issue a lot. You've given workshops in schools. You've talked about, and you've been on our show before to talk about bullying in schools, and specifically bullying around sexual orientation. Should a school have to adopt a gay-straight alliance, whether they might want to or not?
Well, I think what's really important is, the question where I should be asking is, what should we be allowing kids to do? And if students want to organize a club that addresses bullying in schools, I think we should support their initiatives. I don't think we should ever turn down student initiatives, and that's what we're really talking about here. When it comes to homophobia and transphobia in schools, it makes up 80% of the forms of bullying that we're seeing in schools today in Canada. And I think this is a serious issue that we either need to decide that we're going to address or not. And I think students across Canada want to address it. And especially in Ontario, we're seeing an entire piece of legislation that's saying, teachers and administrators aren't supporting students. So the ministry has to step in and do something to support those students. We're not talking about kids forming clubs that they just want to hang out in. We're talking about kids who want to feel safe, who want to not have to consider suicide as an option. We're talking about kids who are really marginalized here. And we're talking about people's lives. And, if this initiative helps save one life, it's the right thing to do.
Do you understand the perspective, though, that in a Catholic church where the Catholic teachings are that homosexuality is wrong, that having a gay-straight alliance to some people might seem to be condoning that behavior?
I can see the argument, but, there's a huge fallacy in that. Like, I'm Catholic myself. I go to church every Sunday. And I don't believe that that's what, Christ is trying to teach. He's trying to teach love and respect. And if you've ever been to a Gay Straight Alliance meeting, if you've ever worked with queer students who are trying to make their school safer, that's what they're trying to do. I think there's something really actually Christian in, Gay Straight Alliances and diversity clubs and anti-bullying clubs. I mean, this isn't football team. This isn't chess club. This isn't anime. This is students trying to make their school a safer, better place for everyone. I think it's what Jesus would do.
Don, what do you think about that?
I think Jesus would call upon us, and so we've called upon others, to ensure that the school's a safe place for every child. We also think that it's vitally important that each school community be able to assess what their particular needs are, rather than having something legislated by Queen's Park or the legislature in any other province that says these are the types of clubs that you must establish. The students, parents, we have parent councils, the administrators, the teachers, they're in a relationship in a community that also includes churches and synagogues and businesses, and there's opportunities for the church community to determine what's needed there, and to do so respectfully. It's a strange position to suggest that we should be respectful of students' desires by imposing on the Catholic education system the will of the legislature in violation of their religious beliefs and principles.
But John, though, to be respectful, we're not talking about the legislature acting unilaterally on schools. We're talking about students who have begged the Ministry of Education for support. We're talking about kids who are dying in our schools today, who are being bullied, who are being beaten up, who are being teased, mocked on a daily basis, who are not being supported by their schools and had to bypass the systems that they're in and get help from the Ministry of Education. And now the ministry is supporting those students. This is not some legislation coming out of nowhere. This is being crafted for years now. And this has been talked about and consulted and dialogued for years. And we already legislate a lot of stuff in schools. We legislate curriculums, we legislate mandatory physical fitness, we legislate healthy eating. So why can't we legislate supporting students' initiative in schools? We're not legislating what's happening in those clubs. We're not legislating how those clubs dialogue with those schools. We're allowing those school communities to have those decisions and make those dialogue decisions on their own. What we're saying is that if students want to start a club that addresses bullying, they should be supported in doing so and not blocked by schools, which is happening today.
All right. So what do you think, Don?
But at the same time, the bill that actually has been worked on for years is Bill 14, and the discussion is about Bill 13. Bill 13 has not had the same background research and effort put into it. It's a very flawed piece of legislation. When we look at the schools and we look at accommodating students, I think that the students who are attending schools that are in the Catholic tradition, we have a document that's been produced by the Catholic trustees respecting differences that proposes something, and Jeremy has proposed something, the broader diversity club, which is actually not permitted under Bill 13. And that's why I'm going back and saying that the community needs to be able to make the assessment itself.
So let me ask you then specifically about this anti-bullying legislation that's currently in play. Are you saying it's wrong to say to schools, if students come forward and say we want to form a gay-straight alliance, it's wrong to say that the school has to adopt that? The school should be able to say, no, you're not going to have one in this school. Is that what you're saying?
I think they should be able to have the conversation about what they will have in that school.
So if the school decides they don't want a gay-straight alliance, they should be able to say no to it. Is that what you're saying?
I think they should be able to have the conversation internally. And if the conclusion is that there's another form of club that will meet the desire that's being presented, then proceed in that type of a direction. When I was in high school, I played chess, and we had a chess club. There was a small group of us that desperately wanted to have a chess club and to maintain it. But there was another group of students that played war games, and they couldn't find a teacher sponsor, and we became the Chess and War Games Club. Not because we wanted to, but because after conversation, there was a realization that there was a place for both groups of students to share a student supervisor. In this instance, it may well be that students come and say, look, we have a particular concern. There may be a group of students that have a similar and related concern and an alternative solution. Certainly the
But bottom line, if the school decides we don't want a gay-straight alliance in our school, you're saying they should be able to do something else instead, or do nothing if they choose to do that at the school level?
I think they should, yes.
Okay.
Well, first off, Don,
I just want to make sure we get the other panelists into the discussion.
Sure. The other point that I do want to make is we released just this past Monday a report looking at the surveys and the studies in regard to bullying in schools in Canada, and the number, Jeremy, with respect that you quoted as far as bullying is extremely out of line. It's not even in line with the study done by AGAL or the McCreary study in British Columbia that was also looking particularly at the gay and lesbian community.
Okay, well, let's come back to that in terms of how much bullying is about sexual orientation. We'll come back to that. But Ruth, what are your thoughts?
It's an interesting piece, because part of what we're talking about here is who makes decisions for who, and how do we get what we need into our schools. And I think the reality is that when we're talking about supporting kids who are struggling, it's a little different than a chess club, it's a little different than a math club. We're talking about kids who aren't necessarily even aware of the kinds of help and support that they need. They know they're having a hard time. They don't necessarily know what's out there. They don't necessarily even know what to ask for. And as schools and parents, we have an obligation to provide an environment that is safe for our children. And so I would be concerned if a school was going to make a decision, like the administration of a school was going to make a decision, yay or nay, you can have the support group that you need, or you can't, because I either perhaps even personally disagree or agree, and leave somebody out on a limb without the support that they require.
Okay.
So in that sense, I think it's really, really critical that we take a really solid look at the implications of making those decisions, because kids are dying.
All right. Peter, John, what do you think?
I'd like to see parents kind of brought into the process perhaps a little bit more, and really see parents as the primary educators and responsible for educating their children at home, but also that certainly has a role when it comes to formal education as well, and involving parents in that aspect as well. And so I would have liked to see probably more consultation with parents, and see parents involved in the solution as well, and a community kind of focused solution. I think the jury is still a little bit out on anti-bullying legislation. It's since the Columbine incident in the U.S., I've seen a proliferation of anti-bullying legislation across the states. I think it's something like 46 or 48 states have it, and it still remains a huge problem in the U.S., as we know. So I still have questions whether this is going to be effective to actually address the issue as a whole, and perhaps time will tell. I don't know.
Bottom line, though, if a school says we don't want a gay-straight alliance in our school, should they be able to say no to it, or, as the legislation is proposing, should they be forced to have that alliance if the students want one?
I think in the case of Catholic schools, it probably is problematic to force that. I do see the benefit in having a diversity club. I think, unfortunately, that has come to dominate the discussion around this bill. I think that's unfortunate, because there's so many other things in the bill that could be discussed. And
but it is part of a wider issue about where the boundaries are in terms of public policy and publicly paid for religious education, which is what the Catholic schools are in Ontario. They're the publicly funded system that has a religious component to it.
yeah, and I would agree with that as well. Certainly, because of the public funding, that is an issue. So, I mean, you could have different options. You could leave it as is. You could have the system as it is. You could propose a system in which the money follows the student, or you could move towards a secularized one system, one secularized system. But I think we have to remember that secularization involves all religions and all people of faith. So I think to whatever system we choose, whether we would even to remove funding from Catholic schools, I think we would still be confronting these issues, maybe not on gay-straight alliances, but on similar issues in terms of pluralism within our school. So I think it's still an issue and still a tension that we'll have to wrestle with.
And let's remember, when we talk about the publicly funded separate schools, that the funds are collected publicly, but it's by declaration of the parents as to how the distribution takes place. So I'm not declared as a Catholic or a separate school supporter, so my education taxes go towards the public school system, not to the separate Catholic school system, and those who declare their taxes are going to that education system.
Right, so it's funded from the government, but it's funded from the individuals who choose to support that particular system. In other words, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, all government funding ultimately comes from the taxpayers, and in this case, for constitutional reasons, there's a taxpayer elective as to which system they prefer to fund.
Sure. Jeremy, maybe you can talk for a moment about what a gay-straight alliance is and how that might be different from a diversity club.
Well, I mean, a gay-straight alliance is a club of students who are LGBTQ, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, or even straight, who are collecting to either meet for social reasons, get to know each other, create a safer space in their school, or to make a difference in their school, so do education or awareness raising around bullying. I'm really disappointed by some naysayers who have been sort of criticizing gay-straight alliances, calling them sex clubs, which is totally inappropriate and totally untrue. And these clubs have been really involved in consulting with parents and teachers and the ministry to create Bill 13. It's been a long time coming. It's been developed over a number of years. And this anti-bullying legislation is what these kids want.
So what's a diversity club then? What's the difference?
The diversity club looks at diversity issues. Most diversity clubs focus on racial issues, sometimes religious and ethnocultural issues. You know, we're starting to see some diversity clubs in Catholic schools trying to include LGBTQ topics, but a lot of schools are denying students the right to talk about these topics. And I think that's really where the legislation needs to come in to support students. You know, queer students in all schools, you know, both Catholic and separate and public, are finding that they're not able to talk about gay and lesbian issues, are being silenced on these issues. And that's what creates a system of homophobia. That's what's creating death in our schools. That's what's creating teen suicide. You know, and there's a huge problem with this.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with more on this topic when we return on Talk Ottawa. We'll be right back. Is there a topic or guest you'd like to see?
Either way, you're stepping on somebody's toes, right? And just got to follow whatever the rules are, whatever the law is.
Well, I think that basically people who are gay are born gay. It's a choice. It's not a big deal. I think Catholics, especially the right wing, tends to over-moralize a lot. And I really think that interference in people's constitutional rights by a school should not be allowed.
I don't see why not. I mean, it's still the same sort of feeling behind it, I guess, eh? So, yeah, why not? I mean,
All right, that's what some of our viewers thought about this topic. So let's continue the discussion. And Jeremy, I think you were talking before the break about what a gay-straight alliance is, and I think there are a lot of parents who feel that if there's a club in their school that is about everybody understanding each other and respecting each other and making sure that the school is a safe place and that bullying isn't taking place for any reason, including sexual orientation, and that there's just mutual respect, and that's what's being promoted. I don't think too many parents would be opposed to that in any school. But if the gay-straight alliance is also about what some people would describe as promoting the gay lifestyle, that's how some people would term it, then a lot of parents, particularly within the Catholic school, might object to that. Is there a gray area here with some of the gay-straight alliances, or are they clearly doing one thing as opposed to the other?
You know, it's really funny. When I first came out a few years ago, I was told by a bunch of people that, oh, you know, you were recruited or people promoted it. And there's no promotion in the gay community. We're not recruiting. We're not Christian missionaries, you know. We're not trying to convert people. We're just trying to create safer spaces in our schools. And the reality is that, you know, diversity clubs, anti-bullying clubs in separate schools don't go far enough. You know, they're shutting down dialogues around anti-homophobia and anti-transphobia, and kids are dying as a result of it. You know, Bill 13 has been crafted by experts and researchers and youth and politicians and parents and teachers and administrators for years now, both in Catholic and public schools. And it's a fantastic piece of legislation. You know, it's really disappointing that the other side is sort of lying about how Bill 14 is you know, been worked on for years, or how Bill 14 is encompassing of all these values, and it's not. You know, what we really need to do and what we really need in schools, and what youth are saying especially, is they need support when it comes to anti-homophobia and anti-transphobia. And I would love to see adult leaders, you know, get involved on this issue, educate themselves, educate each other. That's really what a gay-straight alliance does.
But is there a fundamental conflict between the purpose of a gay-straight alliance and the teachings of the Catholic Church, where on a basic level, the Catholic Church is saying you're not supposed to be gay, and a gay-straight alliance is saying it's okay to be gay?
You know, I mean, the Catholic faith comes from the fundamental basis, you know, hate the sin, don't hate the sinner. And I think, you know, Catholic or gay-straight alliances in Catholic schools are saying the same message. They're just wanting to have an open dialogue on, you know, what is homophobic and transphobic bullying? How does it happen at our school? How can we address it? You know, like, we should be allowed to talk about the fact that 42 years ago in Canada, it was illegal to be gay in our country. And over the last 42 years, we've gone to gain human rights. You know, these are the dialogues that are shut out of our history classes, our geography classes. You know, the fact that in 79 countries in the world criminalize homosexuality, these are the dialogues that are shut out of separate schools. And these are the dialogues that would be brought into separate schools if this legislation passes. And there's a value in educating youth. There's a value in engaging kids in these dialogues. And more so, these kids are asking for it.
All right, Don, what do you think about that?
It's interesting to me. One, I will say that I take some umbrage at being called a liar because I disagree with Bill 13, and am one of several constitutional lawyers, not all Christians by the way, who have looked at the bill, have identified the flaws, and are very concerned that it's going to lead to years of litigation. And we've proposed to the Premier and to the members of the provincial legislature amendments that they can make to the bill. You know, I can point out too that Christianity is illegal in more than 60 countries around the world, and there are over 200 million Christians who daily face persecution, and 180,000 being put to death every year for their faith. These are all verified statistics that have been worked out through a number of organizations internationally. When I look at the World Health Organization surveys in Canada, and I look at the Statistics Canada surveys in Canada, the data says that 22% of the students in our schools are experiencing bullying. It's pretty constant over the last decade. That 38% of the students who encounter bullying, it's the same bullying that many of us at this table encountered when we were in school. It's because of physical appearance. The next highest category is because of your marks, your grades. You're either a brainiac, so someone's going to pick on you, or you're a dunce, and somebody's going to pick on you. Then the next category is ethnicity and race. And when we look at the categories that have been identified, there are actually more students in Canadian schools today who are being bullied because of their religious belief than because of their sexual orientation.
But we're not talking about why they're being bullied. We're talking about how they're being bullied, right? So if you're a loser because of how you look or because of your race or your, like, whatever, you get called a fag. So no matter who you are, no matter what you do, whether you're running wrong, whether you're dancing wrong, whether you're walking wrong, whether you're dropping your books or failing your test, the answer is you get called a fag. And that sort of homophobic language is what's creating a negative culture for LGBTQ youth, 10% of students in our schools. So what are we, like, if we put a wheelchair ramp in a school for kids in wheelchairs, right, what are we doing to make our schools accessible for queer youth? The reality is that we're doing nothing.
Well, no, the reality is not that we're
no,
doing
we
nothing.
are.
Because your organization itself, you've noted, goes into several schools and talks about these diversity issues.
I think,
and there are other groups that are doing the same type
point.
of thing.
But I think you're missing the point, right? I mean, I think there are so many schools out there that are shutting out these dialogues, that are preventing students who want to make their school a safer and better place from doing something. And as a result, those schools are leading those students to death.
I agree with opening up the dialogue. I think the dialogue needs to be held. What I disagree with is the way that it's being mandated in Bill 13, because there are other options. As I said, every student, I don't care if a student is an evangelical or a Catholic, I don't care if a student is straight or gay, I don't care if a student is black or white or yellow or any color in between, they should feel safe in their school. They should be able to engage in constructive dialogue about when they don't feel safe. And there needs to be an interaction within the community to figure out what's required. Yeah, there are schools where there are children who are attending whose parents are alcoholics, and there are schools I'm quite certain that would decline having an Al-Anon chapter in the school, and there might be one in the community. And I think we can access community resources, we can build opportunities, and make a space in the school for the dialogue, because diversity. If we really, truly wish to respect diversity, then what we have to do is be inclusive about that and be accommodating of those who are different than us to find the ways to work that out.
So
and
what
the
would
Catholic
be the
school
reason,
in particular.
what would be the reason that somebody would say, we don't want a gay-straight alliance in our school? If we say to a school, you have the choice about doing that or not, what would be the reason they wouldn't do it? Well,
you know, it's kind of awkward because I'm not Catholic, so to speak, on behalf of the Catholic community in particular, where the objections have been raised. They've indicated a willingness, certainly the trustees issued a report that talks about respecting differences through diversity clubs and opportunities, with a specific objection to having a gay-straight alliance enforced upon them through legislation to enact in the school. I would really encourage that you invite, I know you have invited for today and they weren't able to make it, but I would encourage you to invite Catholic educators to engage in that conversation so that they can speak from their faith perspective. Because in the same way that it's entirely appropriate that I would respect Jeremy and Jeremy would respect me, and we sit at this table and we have a dialogue and neither of us puts our hands around the other's necks to try and end the discussion early, we need to respect the faith perspective of the Catholic Church and the constitutional right that has been granted to them to operate the separate school system that is functioning. and the fact that they have expressed through their trustees that there's an openness to dialogue, but they're not prepared to accept something that's forced upon them.
All right, Ruth, you've been trying to get in here.
There's a couple of things that come up as I'm listening, and I think sometimes as adults in particular, we get caught in what I would call the tyranny of the word or but. So we have to have this or that. We can do this, but we can't do that. And it tends to shut down our capacity to creatively find ways to solve problems. Kids have a need to feel that they are accepted. The kids have a need to have a safe place where they can go and they can get support. And that's what I hear Jeremy talking about when he's talking about the gay straight alliances. This is a place, it's a safe place where if I am a lesbian student or I fit into any of those categories, that I can go and I know for that period of time, I'm not going to be called names, I'm not going to listen to the homophobic language, I'm going to be okay to be me. And I think that is really, really critical. And Don, you brought up Al-Anon and so on. If I have an alcoholic parent, sometimes I need specific help in terms of how to deal with alcoholism. So when I hear talk about diversity clubs and more sort of generic types of support groups, my question is, if I'm in that category of needing specific help in a specific area, I'm not sure that a generic club is going to do that. How we get them, what we end up with, I mean, there's lots and lots of rooms there for different ways of approaching it, but compliance and our willingness as adults to go along with things is another piece, because when you look at the compliance continuum, when something comes in that we feel needs to be done, there are those who are completely non-compliant. No matter what you say, they are not going to do it. They don't believe it, they're not going to buy into it, and the only way you can get anything is legislation, where they will comply to the point that they absolutely have to be in safe from the letter of the law coming down to haunt them, and frequently that's related to whether or not they're going to end up having to pay damages if they don't. And then you go right up to the other end of the spectrum where somebody gets on board and says, you know what, this is absolutely the right thing to do, and we are going to take this into consideration in every decision that we make. And they've gone beyond being compliant to be fully integrated. And you've got every possible place along that continuum in between. My concern, if there isn't the legislation, because you know what, we've had a long time to try and figure this out. And we haven't done a particularly good job of it. I do sessions with kids and adults around harassment, around bullying, around teasing, and so on. When I ask a room full of adults what people get teased about in the workplace, and then I ask a group of kids in school, the lists are still the same. That's scary. We're not getting it. We're not figuring out how to do it on our own. And if it takes legislation to do the wake-up call for people to get things started, then that may be a reasonable way to go.
All right, we have to take a quick break, but we'll come back with more on this topic, and we'll also get to the situation at St. Paul's University when we come back on Talk Ottawa. We'll be right back. Want to stay up to date with the show or submit a question for an upcoming guest? Then talking about legislation and what it needs to include to address bullying, specifically bullying around sexual orientation. And I want to come back to something you said earlier in the show, Peter John, and that was the fact that it's been tried in many places and it doesn't necessarily work. Can you shed a bit of light on what the experience has been? And if it's not through legislation, then how do we address bullying in schools?
Yeah, I think some of the issues are go beyond to how we even define bullying, how we understand bullying, and sometimes that's difficult to define in legislation. And I think Bill 13 in particular has some issues around the definition that could probably be tuned up. And it's always difficult when you try to have a sort of universal sort of piece of legislation to fit a specific community. So my response would be to work towards communal responses. Every school has a code of conduct. Every school has sort of those resources already at their fingertips. I think it's a matter of having those things enforced and having parents and teachers be in dialogue and actually addressing the issue, because far too often something doesn't get addressed. And I think some of the legislation, actually in Alberta, they just had a new Education Act that died on the order paper because of the election. But one of the pieces of legislation in that bill for bullying suggested that it basically amounted to having kids almost police the internet and then report back to the school if they saw something on threat of being suspended. So if we have a culture where kids feel threatened to even sort of respond and to address the issue and bring it to the attention of authorities, certainly threatening them with suspensions isn't going to work. So while it maybe look like a good idea on paper, I think we have to kind of bring it back a little bit and look at our community and look at what are the effective ways in our community that we can tackle these issues. And sometimes, I mean, really bullying, and it comes down to a relational issue and how we relate to one another. And I think it's difficult to legislate schoolyard relationships. There might be aspects of that legislation that will be helpful, that will give teachers more power to kind of deal with situations, but ultimately, I'm not sure this is going to be as effective as we hope it will be.
So let's
are
not
you
forget,
saying
Mark,
then,
by the way, that it was brought up a little bit earlier, let's not forget that the current government passed the Keeping Our Kids Safe in School Act in 2009, and Bill 14 is actually an advancement on that legislation, whereas Bill 13 is almost a start all over again. We've also had in place for some time now Policy Memorandum number 144 from the Ministry of Education that also deals with bullying and gives instruction to administrators and educators in that regard. So it's not that the issue hasn't been dealt with, it's not that the issue hasn't been considered, it's that at this point in time the issue is very prominent, and it's fairly clear that the legislative and policy initiatives already taken have not been sufficient to address the problem.
But that's
So
not
are you-
entirely true, because what you're saying is that we've addressed bullying. We haven't really addressed homophobic and transphobic violence in schools. And that's what's missing from previous legislations. That's what's missing from the dialogue. That's what's missing from the conversation. And that's what we need to talk about in our schools.
It's kind of interesting that in Toronto, at the Toronto District School Board, which was the first school board in the country to pass an equity and diversity program to specifically address the concerns that you're stating here, Jeremy, that the incidents of bullying over the last decade have remained pretty constant in every category. And that, again, is in the paper that we released on Monday. It reflects that. And so the concern is that there's something deeper at the root that has to do with character issues.
I think you're
that isn't
mistaken on that
addressed
report
simply by
about. I think
policies.
you're very mistaken on that report by the Toronto District School Board. In the last 10 years, we've seen the creation of the Triangle program to create a safe space for LGBTQ students. It's prevented a number of suicides. It's actually made huge waves across the country and been a model for the rest of the country. So I think you're a little bit mistaken in your sort of.
I'm just saying it
in
hasn't
your-
decreased the level of bullying that's being reported by
So
the
let
students.
me
I
ask
think
you
you're
this, Jeremy,
misinterpreting the statistics, actually.
Let me ask
but-
you this. Can you stop bullying, and specifically bullying around sexual orientation, through legislation? Is that what's going to stop it?
You know what's going to stop bullying is students being able to dialogue about the things they want to dialogue about. Students being able to educate and gain information about the things they want to educate and gain information about in schools, places of learning. I think if we want to talk about gay and lesbian issues in schools, we should be allowed to. And teachers and administrators should not be shutting down these dialogues, which they are. And that's the problem here. And I fundamentally believe that Bill 13 will open up that dialogue, will support students, will support teachers. We're working with teachers in Catholic schools right now who are afraid of losing their jobs if they mention the word gay in a classroom when relating to curriculum. That is the culture of the schools that we have across our communities in Ontario, and I think we have to address that.
Okay. So, Peter John, are you saying that if legislation doesn't work, is legislation in a lot of cases being introduced as a political response to something, to say, look, something's happened, bullying has become very high profile, there have been, for example, some recent suicides that have generated a lot of attention and response, so it's government feeling like it has to do something, but it might not be doing the right thing, it might not be doing enough?
I think that even the fact that we had two parties introduce two pieces of legislation dealing with anti-bullying on the same day is probably a bit of a tip-off that, yes, I think politicians want to look like, they're generally concerned about the issue and want to look like they're responding to it. So I think that's part of that. And I think even this aspect of gay-straight alliances and respecting differences has become politicized in some respect. Long before this legislation was introduced and talked about, we had the introduction of equity and inclusive education strategy, and in there it was recommended to schools that they have gay-straight alliances, and that's actually sort of where this bubbled up to the surface. This issue surfaced with one of the Catholic boards saying that they weren't going to go ahead with the group. And it eventually came back to the Premier's office, and they're quoted in the paper as saying, we expect the strategy to be followed, but they didn't give any instruction beyond that. And it really wasn't until this bill was introduced and it was being mandated and legislated, but there was a little gap left to say that we want these clubs, but you don't have to call them this. And so, to me, it's become like a little bit of a game. And now that we've got into it, I don't think we're actually having this kind of dialogue at the political level about these groups. I think it's parties are taking hard lines, and so we're not really actually having the dialogue about, well, what is the purpose of these groups, the kind of thing that we're doing today.
So Jeremy, let me read you a quote from Mark Mullen, who is the chair of the Ottawa Catholic School Board, and get your reaction to that. He says, there is a place in each of our Catholic schools for clubs that share similar objectives to most gay-straight alliances. We do not want to see outside interest groups involving our students in activism or advocacy, where a more inclusive group or club in the school could achieve the goals of acceptance and celebration of the rich diversity of our students.
You know, we work in Catholic schools in Ottawa, and we have great relationships with them, and it's been fantastic. I think, you know, that statement really affirms that, you know, gay, straight alliances and diversity clubs and supporting student initiatives especially are what we need in our schools. And I think that's what he's speaking to. You know, we can have the semantics game over what we want to call it, but we have to open up the dialogue. And what he's saying in that is that, you know what, if our students want to do this, if they want to make this happen, let's do that.
So when you do a presentation in a Catholic school, what is it that you're saying?
It's the same things we say in public schools. We answer the same questions. You know, we talk about, you know, what does it mean to be gay? Who are gay people? You know, what is homophobic and transphobic bullying? Where does this culture of bullying come from? And then, of course, how can we as a school community address it? And then after the talks, we start clubs, we start initiatives, we start dialogues, and youth start initiatives. And our organization takes a step back and we support those initiatives. You know, in schools across Ottawa, they run, you know, educational events and raising awareness events, and upcoming on April 11th is the International Day of Pink, and we have about 9 million people across the world registered. I mean, this is something that youth are really passionate about. I'm not sure why adults are so passionate about stopping youth and why Bill 14 is even on the table. You know, it's well known that Bill 13 is really making a difference. It's been crafted and supported and designed by communities.
And what's wrong with Bill 14?
Bill 14 doesn't go far enough. You know, I mean, if we're not going to include the word LGBTQ, if we're not going to talk about homophobic and transphobic bullying in an anti-bullying legislation, we're not doing our job properly. It's a lazy, terrible piece of legislation that's poorly crafted for political reasons, just like Peter John just said. I mean, it's a reaction to stuff going on in the community. You know, it's shameful to see politicians in our community appropriating the stories of queer youth who are dying, you know, sobbing in Parliament and saying, this is a piece of legislation I passionately support, but I don't support gay-straight alliances. When those students who have died wanted gay-straight alliances, that's shameful. And I think politicians in Ottawa need to take accountability and need to apologize for what they've done. Apologize for lying to, you know, Ontarians about the experiences of youth. You know, politicians supporting Bill 14 haven't spoken to youth in Ottawa, haven't dialogued with LGBTQ clubs, even though they've been invited to. And I think it's really unfortunate when you put a piece of legislation, you don't talk to the kids in your community, in your schools, and you go up in the legislature and you lie about it. And I think that's really disgraceful.
So when you say that people are lying about it, those are strong words. What specifically are they lying about? You
know, politicians behind Bill 14 have said that they've met with student groups, that they've met with gay-straight alliances, and they really haven't. They haven't met with the LGBTQ community at all. They haven't worked with us at all. They haven't met with LGBTQ youth, and that's really the problem here. We have a community, the queer community, in schools, 10% of students saying, we are suffering. We are dying, we are being victimized, we're being harassed on a daily basis, we're being bullied, and we need help. That's what's come out of these suicides. And passionate Ottawans feel this, care about this. I mean, the support for the No More Bullies campaign, the support for initiatives like Jared's Vision and YSB and CHEO have been outstanding. However, politicians have sort of sidestepped the anti-homophobia and gone straight to the bullying and said, oh, well, you know, we're going to go with this because that'll appeal to our base. And I think that's really unfortunate. Politicians have said that they've met with youth. They haven't. Politicians have said that this is inclusive to the LGBTQ community, and that's not true. This is an opportunity for the first time ever in our province to address homophobic and transphobic bullying in schools. And I think if you're supporting Bill 14, you're on the wrong side of history, because, either we win it this year, or we win it in 4 years, or we win it soon, but it's going to happen. It has to happen, because kids are going to keep on dying.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about this and more when we return on Talk Ottawa. We'll be right back. Do you have a... Welcome back to Talk Ottawa, and let me introduce another topic for our panel, and that is what's happening at St. Paul's University here in Ottawa, where the school has ordered the Students' Association to stop handing out condoms from its offices to the students at the university. And again, this is an issue of where the boundaries are between public policy and religious education. So let's get some quick reaction from everybody on that. Peter, John, do you want to go first on this? Is the school right? Is the Students' Association right?
I guess as a Catholic institution, a student could probably guess what the position of the school is going to be. And I think it's important. We're not talking about elementary school. We're not talking about high school. We're talking about students, and you take responsibility for their own sexuality and their own sexual behavior. So do they need to have their student union handing out condoms? I'm not even really sure that's an issue.
Okay, Ruth?
Well, I think it's a no-win situation. Do you hand them out? Do you not hand them out? Does it make a difference in terms of whether or not somebody has protected sex? I mean, the Catholic Church has always been very much against birth control, but condoms aren't just about birth control. Condoms are about stopping sexually transmitted diseases. And so unprotected sex, is that what we're advocating for people? I would have a concern if people aren't practicing safe sex.
But of course, that isn't what the church is advocating, or the school.
And yet, does it make a difference? Personally, I think handing out condoms is a great idea, but that's my personal opinion, and I don't either attend or belong to the Catholic Church, so I'm not really a good person to ask, I guess.
Okay, Don?
First, I'll address something that Jeremy said just a little bit earlier, because certainly the Statistics Canada, the World Health Organization, and the McCreary study that was sponsored by a number of gay and lesbian organizations all indicate that the LGBTQ community in the education system in Canada is 1% to 3% of the population, depending on which province you're in. Not 10%. 10% is a number that's commonly thrown out. And so,
well, we can get back to that
still
topic
serious
in a moment.
issues.
We can get back to that topic in a moment,
as far as,
I want to talk about the
as far
St. Paul's
as St. Paul goes, I think that we have a Catholic institution that has principles which the students who enrolled to go there were aware of before they arrived, and the institution is in a position to enforce the principles that come from their religious beliefs. And I do have difficulty with others saying that the institution should not be able to do that, when just down the street we're working with students at Carleton University who want to have a club on campus to talk about pro-life issues and to engage in debates, dialogues, conversation with those who don't agree with them, and they're being told that they can't have a club on a campus at a public university. Certainly at a public university, we would have an expectation that it's a free-for-all, it's open for everyone. At a Catholic university, my expectation would be that Catholic principles would apply.
Okay, Jeremy?
I'm a U Ottawa grad, so St. Paul's is actually under the U Ottawa banner. And the student union is run by the Student Federation of the University of Ottawa, and I think the SFUO and the Safer Sex educational team as part of health services do an amazing job at raising awareness. I think, if you want to police people's morality, you should totally do that. But stopping at the handing of condoms doesn't really prevent someone from having or not having sex. If you want to tell people to not have premarital sex, that's a great dialogue. But for those who are, and a number of U Ottawa students attend St. Paul's because it's a free building and it's open and it's accessible. I think if they're students and maybe they're not part of St. Paul's University using the space, they should be allowed to have access to the resources that they need to or that they expect. Tuition's expensive, condoms are expensive, access to safer sex information is almost non-existent in curriculums across Canada, which is part of the problem and part of the rise in STI and STVVI transmissions of sexually transmitted infections across Canada. And so we need to go back to basics for some people. You know, for some people, going to university is a huge experience, and they make mistakes. You know, do we let them make mistakes in a safer environment or less safer environment? That's the choice we have to make.
But isn't there, again, this conflict because it's not consistent with the teachings of the church, which is involved in the university?
I mean, not at all. I mean, St. Paul's is a building, you know. Part of the school houses some religious faculties, but there's also the Faculty of Social Justice that's there. There's a lot of NGOs that are based out of there. There's a lot of students who use this space as part of, you know, the Faculty of Arts or Social Sciences that are mainstream programs, that part of the mainstream part of the university. And that's what the Student Federation is doing. I think this is a ridiculous issue. I can't believe anyone's making a big deal out of this. So, right. It's too bad.
So let's come back to the stats you were talking about, because my reaction to that when you're disputing the stats about how many people who are bullied because of their sexual orientation and how many people are LGBTQ within a school population. Does it really matter how many of them are? Does it, if there were 10 kids being bullied or 1,000 kids, would it really make a difference?
It does.
Would we still want to step in and protect them?
It does matter, and it doesn't matter. At the point where it doesn't matter is that the school should be a safe place for every student. We should be stepping in to offer that protection, that support for every student. Where it does matter is if we are so distracted by the LGBTQ issue, then what the statistics tell us is that we're actually ignoring about 95% of the students who are being bullied in the education system in Canada right now. And those students deserve our protection just as much as the LGBTQ students do.
Yeah, that's why you should support Bill 13. But you know, you're sort of missing the point here. Respectfully, of course. I was up in Nova Scotia, and they had the biggest Black History Month I've ever seen in rural Nova Scotia in Sydney, and there is not one Black kid there. And I thought that was amazing, because they were having a dialogue about racism in a school where you can't be racist. The reality is those kids are going to one day graduate. They're going to go to places where there are Black kids. And they're going to understand those issues. They're going to be aware of those issues, and they're going to engage in those issues. And that's really what the point of this legislation is.
So let me ask you another question. You've been talking in the context of saving lives. You've been talking in the context of kids dying because of bullying around sexual orientation. And I accept that that's happening, but I also would ask you the question, is there more to saving those lives than simply trying to address the bullying that's going on in the schools? Is there a message that has to go to the kids that are being bullied, that if they are bullied, they make different choices themselves?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a variety of messages here. Traditionally, when it comes to anti-bullying education and support, we're looking at supporting the victim and punishing the bully. What we're looking at finally now is programs like Jared's Vision going into schools and educating the entire student body about what is bullying and how can we as a school community address the culture of bullying in our schools. You know, I just got out of an elementary school before we did this panel, and 300 kids passionately excited about learning about anti-bullying was exciting. You know, some kids asked me, how come I'm brown, but I'm not born in India? And I thought that was a brilliant question, because you know what? Kids don't know. And if they don't understand where gay or my skin color or my religion comes from, they should be entitled and allowed to get the answers they need. It was amazing. My favorite comment of the day was a student came up to me and said, I didn't know gay meant homosexual. I didn't know it meant other people. I just thought it was a bad word. And that's why I used it to make fun of people. And that's what we have in our schools today. And that's what we do to make schools safer. That's what Gay Straight Alliances do to make schools safer. We address the miseducation, the myths, and the challenges. And it's amazing when we give youth the opportunity, teachers the opportunity to address bullying, the choices they make.
Ruth?
I think one of the things that came up for me, and Don, you made the comment, that we get distracted by the LGBTQ community, then what about the other 95%? I don't see this as an either or. I think when we start a conversation around how do we create a healthy environment for people, that the LGBTQ community and everybody, we gain. We start down a path that says, let's have those conversations. Let's figure out where to do this. Kids are not stupid. They make the transition between them. The piece that I have a little bit of a hard time with is if we're not talking specifically about LGBTQ, because there are some very specific dynamics to that kind of bullying, then it's harder for kids to go that far. Whereas if we start with the LGBTQ stuff, then the regular bullying, the bullying about, you know, whether you have red hair or you bring tuna fish sandwiches for lunch and they smell funny, or, you know, like all of that other stuff, it gets rolled into it and it does get addressed. And my 4 kids have all been through the school system. None of them made it through without waves. I have kids who were the bullies and I have kids who were seriously bullied. And when we're dealing as parents with those kinds of dynamics, you can't water down the message, because if we water it down, then we're doing a real disservice to our kids, we're doing a disservice to ourselves, and we're doing a disservice to our society. And so I firmly believe there has to be accountability. As an adult, I need to be aware of what messages I'm sending. If I make mean comments to somebody about something totally unrelated, I'm sending a message to my kids that says it's okay to be mean to people. And, you know, so there's a huge piece around taking a look at who we are, how do we deal with things, and what do we need to put in place that has nothing to do with the stats, and it has nothing to do with, you know, one thing or another. It's just saying, you know what, guys, we're not getting this, and we need to find ways of finally taking a handle on this and making a difference.
Okay. I don't see it as an either-or issue either.
I'm glad to hear that.
Either-or issue either. Yeah, Ruth, really that's my objection to Bill 13. I'm not saying throw out Bill 13 and support Bill 14. In fact, what the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada has done is propose amendments to Bill 13 that would make it both more inclusive and constitutionally sound. And we think that Bill 13 offers a framework that, properly adjusted, can be very helpful in the situation, but we have concerns that the way it's currently drafted is in itself bullying towards the Catholic education system and towards those private schools that are offering Ontario secondary graduation diplomas and would be subject to inspection on those purposes.
All right, we'll have to stop there because we're out of time, but thank you all for being part of the discussion. Great to have you all here.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time on Talk Ottawa. Good night.